When we're talking new product development, I've made it my mission internally to kind of illustrate to everybody, look, the strategic sourcing and procurement functions are most effective when we're involved in new product development from day zero.
How do you figure out where to set the bar between making trade-offs between price and non-price factors?
You have an idea, you want to go build a new machine, talk to me.
It's good to see you, Nico. Well, by the way, we don't even have to do anything so formal. It's like, how's your week been?
Hey, Spencer, all good, busy week, but very good. How are you?
Cool. I'm good. Where are you calling in from?
Calling in from Chicago.
Nice. That's great. The summer has come to a close, which is...
temperatures are dropping already over here. It's going to be snowing before you know it in Chicago.
Yeah, I can imagine. So I'd love to maybe start with a quick introduction. I'd love to, share with the audience, who you are and what your role is. And then I'm also curious specifically how you got into the world of procurement.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Nico Orduz. I'm the Global Director of Strategic Sourcing for Time Manufacturing. As you know, I've been here for a little over 2 years now, really starting to build from scratch what is the strategic sourcing function at Time. That's been the role. Happy to say we have a full team now, and things have changed a lot in the 2 years since I've been here. My start in sourcing was kind of by happenstance. I used to work in inventory at Sears Horlicks a long time ago, and someone approached me like, have you heard of this thing called strategic sourcing? I'm like, no, honestly, I have no idea what that is. But took a couple interviews, and next thing you know, I was in the thick of it in my first role as a strategic sourcing analyst.
That's amazing. I'm kind of curious, like when you went to do your MBA, if I remember correctly, you went to Kellogg. What was there some supply chain and procurement content that you engaged in there, or were you like, I'm going to try to do everything but because that's my professional life? And how did that? I'm an MBA myself, so I'm always curious how the sort of education does or doesn't actually affect the work life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's obviously Kellogg is best known for its marketing programs, right? So I did do quite a lot of marketing classes, did some finance, did a little bit of supply chain as well. But no, I tried to keep my MBA very general and kind of just broaden my horizon away from supply chain, again,
Right.
because that's the world I come from, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to spend this, a lot of money.
Yep.
To get an MBA, I want to go broad, right? I don't want to keep focusing on what I've been doing. Now, that said, a lot of people use their MBAs to like try and pivot into a new career or a new space. I chose not to. I'm still very much deep into strategic sourcing and supply chain procurement functions within my company. Not to say that one day I won't, but for now, it's been kind of going deeper into that. So I really took the MBA as an opportunity to explore other things and other parts of business that I don't think I wouldn't have had any exposure to otherwise.
That's amazing. Can I ask, what did you do? Did you have an internship between your first and second year?
So I actually did the part-time program. I was working the whole time. I'd go to work, normal hours, and then 6 to 9 p.m. several days a week, I'd have to go to Kellogg.
Wow.
So, the nicest thing, and funny enough, one of the things that swayed me into going to Kellogg is they actually feed you.
Oh, really?
Or they did when I was going, I should say. They would put out the dinner before
sure.
class, and I was like, okay, I'm in, let's go.
That's great.
One less thing to worry about.
That's convenient. And it's also like driving distance for you, right? So
yeah, it's not bad. I live in one of the outer neighborhoods of Chicago itself, and Kellogg is downtown, the Weebolt campus, downtown on Chicago Avenue. So it's manageable.
Makes a ton of sense. Well, so I'm kind of curious, like, when you were in your MBA, how many folks were coming from the supply chain procurement world? Were there other people like being like, Nico, like, how do I get into this space? Or was it like totally foreign to people? Was it all mostly marketing folks?
There's a little bit of everything, but yeah, I still got a lot of blank stares when I said, I'm in strategic sourcing, like, what do you do? There was a little bit of everything. There were some engineers, there were some people in sales, folks in marketing, a lot of broad backgrounds. I think that was one of the best parts about it. Just so many different people from so many different areas and in different stages of their careers too, trying to either pivot or just broaden horizons, right? Like I was trying to do. little bit of everything, but no, it definitely wasn't overrepresented in like supply chain.
Yeah. There are some youth programs that are definitely more oriented toward it, like Michigan State, of course,
Yeah.
very, very supply chain heavy. MIT has actually a great supply chain and logistics program,
Mhm.
but it's more like the mathy side as I understand it. But I knew some professors there at different times. So you took some marketing though while you were at Kellogg.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, and this might be like asking you to recall ancient knowledge, but like, do you remember anything that you learned from these marketing programs? And to thread the needle one step further, like, is there anything from marketing that you feel like you've been able to apply to the world of procurement in your current job? I know that's like a big question, so I'm just kind of curious if we can riff on it, you know?
Yeah, no, that is a huge question. I'll tell you, I'm not going to remember specific examples or even who the professor was, probably. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think I do use a lot of those things that I learned in Kellogg every day. I think in the way you present yourself, right? And the way you present your ideas, once you've kind of been exposed to that train of thought of, okay, it isn't just the simple supply chain question or equation of what, not simple, but the rigid kind of supply chain equation of when is it going to be here? How much is it going to cost me? Right. There's much more to it. And then the way that you present that to stakeholders internally is a very different conversation than just, hey, here are the numbers. It kind of gives you some angles into, okay, hearts and minds of convincing people to do what you already know is right based on the numbers that you as a supply chain professional really understand. And that someone else in sales is going to be like, I don't care about that. I just want to know if this is good for me to sell more. I think it really helped me think from that lens. I took a few entrepreneurial classes actually while I was at Kellogg, and I thought those were really interesting. Like I took entrepreneurial sales for one thing. That is one professor I do remember very, very fondly. His name is Craig Wardman, and he's done a ton of work at Kellogg to really put forward kind of a sales driven curriculum. Not just in entrepreneurship, but just sales in general, right? Speaking of how sales can be sometimes the untaught skill. Like there's few, if any, don't quote me, but sales bachelor's degrees or master's degrees or any sort of formal education out there that really says, hey, come here, we're going to teach you how to sell. Hey, right? It's a big gap. And I think Kellogg and Craig in particular, and Craig has several colleagues now. I think the program has expanded. He collaborates with other professors there too, is really putting, the effort into expanding that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of curious, like, there's been a few folks I've known in the procurement space that have had a sales background. It's kind of interesting. I'm thinking of, just top of mind, Eugene Galdi from Arxada. He's always telling his teams, like, you're always selling, and they're procurement folks. The other is Steve Patton from Amazon. So there's a few different folks who I've known who are, procurement leaders who have like a sales background or very strong sales bend. I'm kind of curious, like, where do you see sales fitting into the role of a procurement or category manager? And if you have any examples of times where you've had to really sell an opportunity to a supplier, I mean, I'm sure that if you're at a big three auto OEM, you have a lot of power, but sort of the biggest companies in the world, there's always some sales aspects. So I'm kind of curious if there's in how that's figured into your world,
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've always told suppliers during negotiations and conversations about, programs, because I guess backing up a little bit and talking about the kind of company that I've worked at in strategic sourcing for most of my career is matrixed organizations, right? Where you have basically an umbrella corporation that owns just in some cases thousands of businesses that have their own independent P&Ls, right? What I used to always tell suppliers, especially when I was at bigger corporations that had that problem, I came from ITW, which not problem, that situation where there's just thousands of companies underneath that umbrella, right? We're going to negotiate hard. Here's the RFQ. We're going to go through all this process. And then at the end of it, when I've already determined that you are the best partner for this, my role as a strategic sourcing professional flips from your worst enemy to your best friend. No, it turns into very much a sales role internally, because in that scenario, those local or those child companies have a lot of autonomy, right? They have the freedom of choice to say, okay, I'm going to work with X, Y, or Z supplier. Here are my reasons. And corporate, by design, does not normally come out and say, hey, you have to use this supplier because I said so. And, end of story. So I think throughout my sourcing career, it's been very much a sales effort where I have to go on the front end, of course, negotiate, make a great deal, have great value proposition, dollars, of course, then, what are they going to do for innovation and what other support are they going to give me? But then turn around and convince my stakeholders that this is the right choice and here's why. And that's where that sales hat of coming in and explaining the really, really comes in. Because even in some scenarios, there might be some winners and losers internally. It might be a great deal for company A, but not so great for this other one, right? They might have to pay a little more to make the whole deal work. So lots of sales skills involved in that process, the implementation process.
Do you remember a time where you ever really got into like a very tough conflict with a stakeholder where it was like, okay, like we were really not seeing eye to eye on something. We were really locking antlers. I'd love to understand like what was the nature of the disagreement and like how did it ultimately kind of get resolved?
Most of the disagreements when you're doing these multi-site negotiations turn into what I just mentioned, right? Where sometimes some get a better deal than others, or they're reluctant to work with a supplier because of history, things like that. But generally, it just comes down to explaining the value prop, right? And that is not necessarily a numbers thing, right?
Right. And what would be an example of a value prop that you would say, like, hey, like a matrix organization. So like theoretically you can work independently of different people, but I want us all to get on the same page because either we have more leverage or we can have like better terms, or we can do more industrialization of that supplier and work with their build out because we can make a bigger investment. Like, but how does that, but I understand it from our perspective. How do you translate that to the individuals that you're working with?
Depends a lot on like putting yourself in their shoes, right? What is the thing that matters to them?
Yeah.
And in some cases that is, corporate compliance. Sometimes there is an incentive to say, maybe I should. It's minimal. It's not going to make or break my business. Maybe I should just play along. There is some of that. But I think it's really about showing them how it's going to make their life easier, especially if it isn't necessarily a cost thing. I think a lot about travel programs. I've implemented a couple now in my career in sourcing, and there's always a cost associated, right? You're going from, and a hidden cost. Well, it's a cost that is hidden under the previous setup, right? You're going from a scenario where everybody kind of goes their own way, goes to united.com, goes to booking.com, goes to whatever, makes their travel arrangements. You have complete freedom, complete autonomy to do whatever. And they say things like, I'm always very cost conscious, so I always grab the cheapest, et cetera, et cetera. But then, here comes corporate sourcing saying, this is our new travel program. You have to use this. Please make sure you do all your bookings inside that. And they'll come up and say, but, that isn't the best deal, or it's not the most expensive, or, it's not the cheapest. There's better deals out there. And it's like, okay, you have to pause for a second and factor in the value of your own time, right? When you have that autonomy and you're going out there and shopping, you're saving what, 5, 10, maybe $100 if it's some crazy deal that you found, but how many hours does it take you to accomplish that, right?
Yeah.
It's time. How much company time did you waste not spend trying to save $100 when you could have just click done and saved your time too, right? So it's a little bit of framing. It's helping people understand how this makes their life better beyond the dollars and cents.
It's interesting. And then if you have to change something, maybe the program better terms versus like, how many times have you been stuck in, oh, you bought basic economy, sir, so you like can't use the bathroom or upgrade, change speed, or you can't cancel. We'll give you $50 credit a million times. So I can see the performance also being different. I guess I'm kind of curious, how do you make these kinds of trade-offs? And this is a very big question for which there is no right or wrong answer. But how do you think about making the trade-offs between, price and performance, or price and lead time, or price and flexibility, or supplier stability? Because like I feel like those questions are so core to the procurement function, and it's just really difficult to answer, right? But I'm kind of curious, like, how do you figure out where to set the bar between making trade-offs between price and non-price factors?
Yeah. I think that's where the strategic sourcing and procurement functions get a little bit into, the art of the deal rather than the hard and fast. And I think it comes back down to what you as a company care about, right? If price is all you care about, because you make widgets and they don't really matter. Like they're not going to kill anybody. People, it's discretionary spending, excuse me. You can go to a low-cost country and say, hey, I want this for the cheapest price possible. I have no other consideration. I don't care. If you can save me a penny, I will switch from supplier A to supplier B for a penny. Let's go, right? Okay.
Yeah.
That's one extreme, probably rare. Then it's really very much understanding, right? Like your core business, right? Like I work at Time Manufacturing. We make man lifts, aerial platforms, bucket elevators that hold a human and hold them, in some cases, 100 meters in the air. That's 330 feet in the air, right? We can't necessarily, but we cannot say that, hey, make it for as cheap as possible. I don't care if it fails, because if it fails, high likelihood we're going to go kill somebody by negligence. And so we don't negotiate and structure our deals that way, right? We are obviously quality first, right? It needs to meet our engineering specifications and requirements. It has to be structured, sound, et cetera, right? So it's very much, I think, based on what your company cares about. We are, like I said, a heavy engineering company. We need really good quality. We need basically perfect 2-print parts. Otherwise, we can't produce, because we're not going to take the risk, obviously, of putting defective machinery in the market. So we care very much about that. Other companies might be more lenient. So it really depends on what your specific needs are and how you tailor that. Because obviously, like you said it very well, the more of those requirements you have, that correlates to cost. If you need everything perfect every time, well, you're going to pay more. It's simple.
For sure.
Kind of logic of the equation behind it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And look, building on that, eventually, if you have so many requirements that are so hard, you get down to the Venn diagram. You got one supplier left. I need someone who's local, who has this lead time, who has this quality. Okay, one vendor that we can work with. So there's not much competition. Yeah. I guess something you brought up that's sort of interesting is the interaction with the engineering team. Mm-hmm. Like, what does the interaction with the engineering team look like for you and your business? And is there any difference between when you're doing like an NPI project where it's like something that's new, maybe higher velocity on iteration, versus a sustaining project where, engineering might not be as frequent a touch point? I'm kind of curious what that relationship looks like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that was one of the first challenges that I think I recognized coming into this role, where, strategic sourcing didn't exist 2 years ago, right? Something I think every strategic sourcing professional knows, at least if you're in machinery, you need to be very close with your engineering team, right? They're the ones that, with good reason, design everything to fit your spec, right? They design the criteria. They determine how thick the steel needs to be to hold a human up, 300 feet in the air. Having a very strong relationship there is key, but there are different degrees of freedom, I guess, depending on what product we're talking about, right? To your point, if it's an established product that doesn't have any design changes, it's in, steady state production. Yeah, engineering is still very much the very first partner that I go reach out to and say, hey, I see an opportunity here. What do you think? What can we do? Can we reduce the thickness of the steel? Can we change the position of this within the weldment a little bit? It saves us $6,000, whatever it might be. Right, I think it always starts with them, especially on structural components or critical components. It starts with the engineering team's involvement. But beyond that, there's, again, when you're in steady state production, there's a lot of items that engineering will just tell you, you know what, that's off the shelf from whomever. You can find a better source and it fits this, and this. Great. Form, fit, function. Let's go. Right. Talking, fasteners, bearings, things like that. Not always, right? We have very special fasteners in certain critical applications that have to be, incredibly strong, or this thing's going to break. Same thing. But there are some areas of opportunity in steady state that are a little easier to take the lead on without so much engineering involvement. When we're talking new product development, I've made it my mission internally to kind of illustrate to everybody, look, the strategic sourcing and procurement functions are most effective when we're involved in new product development from day zero, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you have an idea, you want to go build a new machine, talk to me, right? What do you want to do? Where are we going to source it, right? What's going to be different about it? And we can, at the beginning, I think as sourcing professionals, our involvement's a little lighter, right? We'll probably just advise and tell you, you want to buy some sort of aerospace steel? I mean, that's going to be very expensive. Can we try something else? Like, it might be high level stuff like that, right? But we'll guide the conversation at least a little bit. And then that way, when engineering starts, actually releasing drawings, we can be a real partner going out to market, finding the right partners that can make these things. And I think it just shortens the new product development cycle because, without that, what happens is engineering goes out, does their work, does it well, right? Designs a very good, cool machine that we think we can sell. But then procurement is in reactive mode, trying to go out there and find people that can make these things at scale. Maybe we source a specific component from a supplier that we probably shouldn't do business with. You open yourself to a lot of risks when you don't involve the procurement function in new product development. So I think we're there, right? We've developed a lot of new processes, revamped kind of our stage gate approval process for new product development. This involves a lot of functions across the company, not just procurement. But I'm happy to say that I think we're in a good place now where we're involved early and we're really helping to get new product development through the finish line in a really, really good way.
That's great. What's the stage gate process? Maybe we can just talk about that for a second.
Just, simple toll gate approval, right? Like you get to a certain point in your new product development and you say, okay, now, engineering has come up with this idea, let's say from the very beginning, and then take it to all the stakeholders at the executive level, right? Marketing, sales, head of engineering, head of procurement, be like, okay, we want to do this. What do you guys think? They kind of start doing market study. And well, if marketing comes back and says, yeah, that's cool, but I'm going to sell one every 10 years. Well, maybe not.
Yeah.
Cut your losses and move on to a different project, right? That's what it is. It's designed to kind of triage along the way, help avoid, honestly, the sunk cost fallacy, right?
Yeah, of course.
To a point where it's like, oh, I've invested $100,000 in this thing, so I'm going to keep going. It's like, well, sure, but every other dollar is also a waste because we can't sell.
Well, I'm kind of curious, when you're talking about, this sort of cost and ease of manufacturing or supplier industrialization question, you use aerospace steel, that's going to be possible, but much harder. How much of these sort of design inputs do you find are coming from procurement versus coming from the suppliers themselves responding to the design and making alternative proposals?
Ooh, it's a tough question to answer. I don't know that I know an example where we're really pulling that level of idea directly from procurement. Obviously we do the best we can, due diligence, but none of us are, I guess I shouldn't say none of us. I myself, I'm not an engineer. I'm not a technical person, right? So, I'll suggest, and folks on my team, I've seen them do it too. We'll suggest kind of common sense things, like, okay, can we do this a little bit differently? But the real value comes from that support of kind of provoking the thought of, okay, what does this actually do from a supply chain side of things? Because again, engineers are focused on form fit, right? Function, not necessarily cost or availability or et cetera. Not always, but that tends to be the role, right? To the other side, one of the things we're really trying to leverage is the knowledge of our suppliers as subject matter experts within their space, right? So we're working on value engineering projects, bringing in the suppliers and telling them, hey, this is what you sell us today based on the process and what you know about it and what you know about the application. What will you change? What would be impactful to not just the cost, but all the other factors you mentioned, the lead time, the quality, etc. If we just tweak this that you happen to know about, Mr. Supplier, because you do this for a living and we don't, help us understand what those opportunities are. We started with a couple of those this year. As anybody that's been in a VAV, there's always some really nice surprises. And I mean, you start with a broad funnel of ideas and it narrows down pretty quick, but anything that makes it through the bottom of that funnel is very impactful to the business.
How do you think about the risk of vendor lock-in? And so yes, I know, I can see the reaction. So one of the things that I feel like is always a little bit of a sliding scale, I would say, for design is sometimes the engineering team will own the full thing, everything end to end. They develop every screw, nut, bolt, surface, and then you have the liberty to go and source it from anyone to your heart's content, right? But then there are some times where it's like, hey, we don't have the engineering resources, or developing this mechanism is just simply not something that we should be doing. And so then you end up designing in somebody else's IP. And on the supplier side, we talk to a lot of suppliers, and they'll often use things like, hey, we develop IP, we develop assemblies as a way of protecting margins. They're not competed down as much. So how do you think about this sort of design ownership, vendor lock-in? I mean, how does this all work in your world?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a big challenge. for us, frankly, for anybody, I suppose, in strategic sourcing buy-in,
Yeah,
right? Because
of course.
the number one lever to go out and source is that availability of the IP, right? You can't very well take supplier A's drawing and intellectual property and give it to supplier B. That's against the rules.
Yep.
Right? You don't want anybody doing that to you. You're not going to do it to anybody else, and it's very much illegal,
Sure.
etc. So no, it's a real challenge. I think, it's a challenge my team faces, and the way we're working through it is being very upfront when we do have the liberty to source, when we own the drawings, right? Being very upfront and very clear that these are our drawings. At no point do they become your intellectual property, Mr. Supplier. I don't care how much
Right.
modifications you make to it. I don't care
Hmm.
that you improved it by 1,000%. Anything you do, it's mine, right? Because it's an incredibly important thing to protect, right? If you lose that autonomy, you open yourself up to a lot of cost ups and supplier lock. Or he said, you're kind of captured prisoner, if you will, to certain suppliers. But it's a real challenge. And honestly, you hit the nail on the head that it's oftentimes a engineering resource challenge, right? If you have a very large or even a legacy of a lot of engineering design work, like we're fortunate to have,
Hmm.
it gives you one degree of freedom. But on the other hand, if you haven't had that, it's a long path, I think, to get to a point where you will. And it comes down to, just like anything else, negotiating with your suppliers so that what you need to be able to go to RFQ, that intellectual property does become yours. There's ways around it where you can you can't share a drawing, clear, it's not your IP.
Yep.
But you can always share your requirements, right? I need a cylinder that'll do this. That's not intellectual property to anybody. That's, your thing, right? I need it to do this. How you design it to make it do that, that's your problem, Mr. Supplier. So on the flip side, that can also be kind of a capability filter from new suppliers you're looking at, right? If you're able to share and tell them the true requirements of what the end product should do, based on that, they're not able to design something for you, then they're obviously not the right supplier to be considering. Sure, they can, make widgets, but they can't design or innovate for you, especially in a situation where you're not engineering heavy, right? Where you don't have from engineering resources. I think it becomes even more critical to make sure that suppliers you do work with are.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. When you do have vendor lock-in, let's say it's just inevitable, right? Like, I remember at Tesla, we had certain suppliers where we couldn't, I shouldn't say the names, but we had certain suppliers where there was just no way to get around it, especially in the safety systems arena. That was a particularly hard one, but because there's not, safety critical and, that kind of thing. Like there's not a huge number of companies. If you remember, I don't know if you remember Takata, but there was like a big, you remember this?
The airbag recall?
Yeah. I mean, that was a crazy situation. It was like, I don't know how close you are to airbags, but there's like broadly two parts of the airbag. There's the bag, and then, which is like a nylon denier bag. And then there is, the puck, which is it's basically just like it's like a grenade designed, like engineered for specific, amounts of inflation of specific bags. But then there was an issue where in hot climates, we had, not we, but actually Takata's inflators, something about the propellant was getting congealed or whatever. And it was burning too fast when deployed. And it was actually it was actually blowing the puck up. And so metal shrapnel was going and shooting out. So it went from being like a grenade to being a grenade. And then all of a sudden, one out of the three major, airbag suppliers is out of the game. And so that was a real, what they call a duopoly situation. So I'm kind of curious, like when you have these kinds of situations where you're with a supplier and there is some sort of, hey, they know each other and there's only two options. And they know each other's pricing kind of through tacit knowledge. How do you actually come into those negotiations and make real headroom?
Yeah, that's a tough scenario, a real difficult environment to kind of play in, right? And I guess I would say in a scenario like that, if we're going to sticking with the airbag example, I would say there's always the opportunity of insourcing, right? If you're talking about leverage, right? Like I want to tell them, you're either going to gain this business or maybe not, right? In a duopoly, I mean, you can bid them against each other, sure, see what happens, right? Give them best. And again, if you're talking gigantic volumes like automotive, you'll probably get somewhere doing that, right? Because shifting it from A to B will be a huge impact for A or B. There's not that many players in the space and they depend on volume. So there's some levers there, but in a situation where you're completely stuck, your avenues are kind of slim, right? Like there's really not too many you can do. It's a tough scenario. I'd have to think about that more, to be honest. That's difficult. Insourcing, like I said, is real, but it comes with a huge capital investment and the huge engineering investment too, to figure it out. Can I make it better than the guys that already do? Or should I even enter that market? But, we can get into economic theory about new market entrants, etc.
Oh, for sure. Here's the question. How have you found should cost modeling to be like a useful or not so useful activity? Like,
I think should cost modeling is a must. You have to do this to some degree, right? Especially in areas where you don't have inside knowledge of how these materials are costed, right? As a sourcing professional, you have to develop some sort of understanding, right? I think they're incredibly powerful, but they wouldn't be powerful in a monopoly because they don't care. Like you can tell them that we have 50% margin. They're like, okay, great. Now your margin's 60%. You near has to go. So there's scenarios where they're utterly useless, right? But in understanding your supply base and understanding, what am I actually paying for? They're incredibly powerful, and they do open up a lot of avenues for questions and they're helpful in VAV exercises, etc. Trying to understand, okay, this material, it's 70% steel. So, hey, Mr. Supplier, the steel market just came down 20%. Why hasn't my price changed, right? Let's talk about that. Let's build that in the contract. Incredibly impactful and helpful in all sorts of ways. I think if you're not doing, should cost modeling and total cost of ownership, etc., you're not doing strategic sourcing. You're not doing it properly.
Yeah, it makes sense. Well, I'm kind of curious, like, and this might be very elementary, but, I'd love to get your perspective on the definition of strategic sourcing, right? So, you came into, I know it's like both a simple and not a simple question at the same time. And I feel like there are a lot of definitions out there, but you came into time and built up the strategic sourcing function or functional thought. What do you feel like are the sort of, for you in your experience, like the most important, 2 or 3 defining aspects of what makes somebody a strategic sourcer or doing strategic sourcing versus what's the opposite of that, transactional or just buying? Like what is the opposite also? I guess it's a good question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think there's the way I tell my family what I do in its simplest form is I negotiate contracts for things, right? That if you want to boil it down to one sentence, right? I negotiate contracts. That's what I do. Or more so what my team does nowadays. But anyway, the getting into like what it is, I always tell my team, if you find yourself writing a purchase order, then I did something wrong. Like, nobody in my strategic sourcing group, from my point of view, should be doing operational procurement work, right? Mm-hmm. And I say that because operational procurement work is a bear, right? It's a mountain of work. It's incredibly difficult. You're always chasing. There's always either too much or too little, right? There's no happy medium where you hit the nail on the head and you had exactly what you wanted, exactly when you needed it. That never happens, So it's a huge mountain of work. And from my point of view, if you're trying to do both that operational procurement and strategic sourcing, well, the operational is always going to take precedent because that's, in a way, more critical, right? If the parts don't get here, well, it doesn't matter how great a price I negotiated. The parts aren't here. I can't build, I can't sell, etc. That aside, what strategic sourcing does, right? Negotiating contracts, building relationships with your suppliers, protecting the company. Right? We back to negotiating contracts. We protect the IP, the financials of the company, right? That's our job, right? Otherwise, you're operating out there on purchase order terms and conditions, which are generally pretty broad. They don't give you a lot of warranty, a lot of recourse if things go sideways, and we create value, right? It's not just price, right? It's building that partnership. It's seeing what else can be delivered. There's always this discourse, I think, in strategic sourcing and in procurement of, is it hard savings or is it cost avoidance, right? I think if you look at the cost avoidance bucket and think of what that is, that's pure value to the company. It doesn't show up in the P&L, etc. But if you think of it in the absence of a strategic sourcing team, well, he could have paid X $1,000 more or not gotten this additional service or etc. Right? That's all in that cost avoidance bucket. So I think that more or less is what strategic sourcing does.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I guess I know this is sort of a topic that, you know, switching lanes a little bit. I know that Ben wanted us to hit on a little bit of some of the things that have happened since we last spoke in this kind of format. I'd love to get your take. I mean, how are you feeling about the global trade environment right now? What have been the changes you've seen? And I guess what actions or inactions are you sort of feeling like it's wise for people to take at this moment?
Yeah, I remember one of my biggest points back then, time we talked about tariffs was, it's all pain right now because of the uncertainty, right? Like at that time it was, you'd flip on the news in the morning and there was a new 30% tariff or a 30% tariff went away or whatever, right? It was day to day and, see your pants, what's happening. It seems like things have calmed down a little, right? There's still some noise of tariffs here and there, a lot less. I think we're starting to see a lot of them actually cement now and like show up in invoices and start to hit the bottom line, right? Where, cash, real dollars are going out to pay for tariffs. And that's starting to eat into margins. And you're starting to see a lot of that pass through into what customers have to pay. And I'm not talking about, staples, right? Or, me going out grocery shopping. I'm talking about what I see in the business when I'm out there trying to buy things or sell things for that matter, right? Like, cost of goods has simply gone up, right? Like we're actually seeing the impact of it now. And that's not a bad thing, right? I am not still convinced if tariffs are going to be good for us or bad for us in the long run, right? I don't know what they're going to do. You can find pundits talking in either direction. They're the best things since sliced bread. They're the worst things since sliced bread. We still don't know the full impact of them. I'm very encouraged that the noise has stopped at least or slowed down.
It feels that way, doesn't it? It feels like there's not as much changes happening on a daily basis.
And my biggest gripe with them, is just so much wasted energy and effort whenever it gets noisy like that.
I mean, it's crazy. And in some ways, it's like, thank God people weren't taking them as gospel when they came out. Because if you thought there was going to be 100-something% tariff, and you totally changed up your supply base, I mean, that would be a lot of thrash,
That'd be a lot of pain. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of pain. But I guess I'm kind of curious, are you, I remember you guys were actively managing, I remember a few levels. One was like the expected base case and then like the potential value at risk across the bill of materials. Like I remember you guys had a really great analysis around this. Is that still something that's being refreshed on a weekly basis? Or is it like, hey, we're not, we feel this is more under control. So like, let's focus on other stuff now.
No, well, I wouldn't say it's weekly anymore, right? Again, because things have slowed down quite a bit. But we still do quite a lot of modeling in that space, kind of trying to think of, okay, where is this going to affect us? Where in the bill of materials is it going to show up? And what is the actual impact to our full cost of goods sold, right? So we still do a lot of that, but it is easier now because we know where it's hitting and what's happening. Not much has changed except for that things are a little more certain.
Yeah, of course. Here's my last sort of question, which is like, what's keeping you up at night? Like, what's the thing that you're like, when you're like, okay, when I get off this call, this has been an enjoyable, oasis away from the trials and tribulations of being a procurement leader. But then what's going to creep back in? What's the first thing that you're going to have to like get back on top of, the fire or like the persistent grind? Like what's the thing that's really like the number one thing on your mind right now?
Yeah. I think what's going to happen to the capital equipment world, right? The one that we live in, my industry, right? And I think everybody was expecting to see a giant pop in investment in machinery and other things when the presidency came into office, right? And I think for a lot of industries that hasn't materialized. So I'm still wondering, like, is it going to continue to be kind of a slow burn? Like, it's not like the industry's dead or anything. Don't want to give that impression, right? Machines are selling. We're still producing, of course, day in, day out. But is there going to be at some point kind of an inflection point where we're going to start to see all industries, not just the machinery, for the utility and telecom industries kind of pop off like everybody was expecting? Fortunately, we're poised and ready to do something like that. We have, shortest lead times in the industry at this point, I think. So we're very much ready, but when's it going to come?
Yeah. Well, what was the thought? Was that the promise with the new presidency that there would be a lot more investment in in machinery and capital equipment?
Yeah, just an impression for me. I mean, I'm not going to cite a source, but yeah, it certainly seemed
Sure.
that there was a lot of pent up demand from last year coming into this year, thinking of, okay, when this happens, is going to free up a lot of dollars, a lot of federal funds and stuff like that. And
Right.
we're going to see the investment come through into our bottom line. But as you know, the federal funds has been, I think, different than anybody expected.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, look, I mean, there's a lot of pressure, as you've seen in the news, to Jerome Powell, the Fed Reserve Chairman, to lower interest rates. And by the way, when you lower interest rates, what that means is that it feels cheaper to make investments now, because you're not competing with like 5% interest you could keep on cash in the bank. You're competing with 1% interest. So it's worth spending money today for future returns, and that's investment. Capital investment is one of those things. So we'll see, but it is becoming a hotly debated political issue, and that's where I have to draw the line. But Nico, thank you so much for the time. This was really amazing. I love our conversations like always, and so having an opportunity to actually record it, snippet it, and then share it out with folks is a real joy. So thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Spencer. Likewise, always a pleasure to chat. Looking forward to the next one, hopefully at some point.
Yeah.